Well, I want to thank all of you for coming this morning. My name, of course, is William Clark, and I had the opportunity to participate in one of the greatest adventures of our century. I'm old now, and as I look back upon the experience of going on the expedition, I would like to share some of the experiences that we had. You have to remember the United States ends at the Mississippi River. Anything beyond that, we had no idea. Not even Thomas Jefferson. But when Thomas Jefferson was elected president, he had an inquisitive mind. And President Jefferson wanted to know what type of animals lived beyond the Mississippi. What type of Native American tribes? Now, we knew that there were a lot of different indigenous tribes beyond the Mississippi, but we didn't know anything about them. The Blackfeet, the Utes, and of course the Teton Shoshone, which we'll talk a lot about the Shoshone. So he wanted to know about the tribes, about the various animals, fish, reptiles, different types of snakes. He wanted to know about the rivers. He wanted to know about the mountains. And he thought to himself, nothing could be more rugged than the Smoky Mountains. Boy, did we have an awakening when we crossed the Rocky Mountains over and above the Smoky Mountains. And then there were the bears. And all of you know that we hunted in Kentucky and Tennessee and Ohio, and the bears were the little black bears. Tiny little things, so cute, you know. And then we came across the white bear, the grizzly, beyond the Mississippi. It would take 5 of these rifles to shoot simultaneously to put down a grizzly bear. 1 would not do it. 2 could not do it. You could shoot them in the brain, in the lungs, and they will still come right at you. So we realized real quick, when you went out hunting grizzlies, you had 5 hunters, and they all had these powerful 50 caliber rifles to put down 1 grizzly. So let's begin at the beginning on my adventure on the Lewis and Clark trip. I have a letter here. I'm not going to read all the letter, but you have to remember Thomas Jefferson had just brought forth a great victory for the United States. And I'm sure all of you are aware of that tremendous purchase called the Louisiana Purchase. Napoleon was desperate for money. And we had an opportunity to buy a large chunk of land for approximately $15 million from Napoleon. And it opened up a lot of land beyond the Mississippi River. Thomas Jefferson wanted to know about it. Who lives there? What type of rivers? What kind of mountains? What type of weather? And we're going to get into all of that. We were in heat of 100 degrees, and we were in a climate up in North Dakota where it was 35 below zero. And this is what we had to deal with for the trip. Lasted from 1803, the beginning that this letter was written, all the way up to 1806 was the total trip of the expedition. Washington, D.C., United States of America. I like how he says that. July the 6th, 1803. Dear Sir, the journey which you are about to undertake for the discovery of the course of the Missouri and for the most convenient water communication from thence, don't you like how they talked? From thence to the Pacific Ocean, your priority is to bring forth all the information that you can. You will have many dangers. Boy, was that an understatement. You will have many dangers from the Indian inhabitants. However, if you escape those dangers, I like how he says that, and you reach the Pacific Ocean, you may find it more important to harness a return not the same way, but by ship. Now, Jefferson realized the Pacific had already been somewhat down California, what we know of as California, Oregon, and Washington, had already been explored by sailors. So we knew that much. But what we did not know was between the Mississippi and beyond the Rocky Mountains. That was the area that was mysterious. All right, where do we begin? Where does William Clark begin on this journey? When I received word from this letter from Meriwether Lewis, I was at a fort, Fort Pitt. Some of you might know that as Fort Duquesne. Some people now are beginning to call it Pittsburgh. And there was a large fort there, and that's where I was stationed. Meriwether Lewis was the personal secretary of Thomas Jefferson. And because of that, Jefferson wanted somebody that he could count on to take notes, write a diary, and come back with all this information that Jefferson wanted. Meriwether Lewis was the person. He made Meriwether Lewis a captain. But Lewis did not want to do this trip alone. He had a friend, and yours truly, William Clark. And he asked Jefferson, can I appoint Clark to go with me, and let's make him a captain also, so that we will have dual authority over the men of this expedition. And it was granted. I received a letter at Fort Pitt that I was accepted by Thomas Jefferson, and that I, first of all, had to go to Harper's Ferry. And it was my job at Harper's Ferry to bring about the most developed and powerful weapons on this trip. Something that would impress the tribes, because we knew most of the tribes beyond the Mississippi River did not have this. And of course they would want this in relationship for buffalo hunting especially. And we're going to find out that when we hunted, and they called it bison, they hunted with spears and arrows. But when we brought these, and we could down a buffalo at 300 yards without getting too close to the buffalo that would endanger that various person on the horse, they wanted these, and they wanted them real bad. Of course, we did not give any rifles to the various tribes. That would give them an advantage over other tribes that lived in the area. So here we are. What kind of rifles would I select for this trip? This is a .50 caliber, and this has a kill shot 300, possibly 400 yards, depending on how good your eyesight. The .50 caliber ball. .50 caliber ball would enter your body like this. It would come out the back like this, and it would cause a lot of damage. And this is what you want when you hunt big game. Elk, buffalo, okay, deer. You want something that's going to down that animal right away, except for what? The grizzly bear. And that would take 5 of these to drop them. So it was my job to get the weapons, which I did. It was also my job to get the best powder, which I did, Spanish powder. And we placed our powder in kegs, and we sealed the keg with beeswax. Can you imagine what would happen on the various canoes going down the Missouri River if it got wet, the powder? We would be helpless. You would have this here. It's worthless without powder. You have to have the gunpowder. So we had to preserve our gunpowder. We had to take enough kegs of gunpowder to last at least 2 years, maybe more. That was just the beginning. We haven't even talked about the food supply yet. So we gathered up powder, we gathered up our rifles, and then what kind of other weapons do we want to have? Well, I chose the Hawk. These are balanced. They're good for hand-to-hand combat. They're good for throwing. They are also a pipe hawk, and we could smoke at the councils of the various tribes. They all like to have councils, and they all like to smoke. Unfortunately, they would smoke Kanika, and we'll learn about Kanika later on. It grows wild in Ohio. It grew wild in the Great Plains. And that was very important for them to smoke their kanika with the peace pipe. But also this could be used as a weapon. So I chose this. Remember, it's my responsibility to gather up all the weapons for this expedition. This was one of my favorites. Secondly, I chose this. Everybody had, I called them the long knife, but it's not like a sword. This is very good for skinning. As you can see up here, Clark brought some samples of some of the furs that we gathered and cleaned. Everything you see here would be used for clothes, except the elk. I have the elk on me. My moccasins, as you can see, are deer. They're 2 deer skins thick because of copperheads and rattlesnakes and water moccasins everywhere. We realize that a rattlesnake and a copperhead coiled up on the ground cannot strike above your knee. So as long as we would have knee-high moccasins, we would be safe from any poisonous snakes. Unfortunately, some of the men in the expedition did get bit by rattlesnakes, but we managed to save them. Most of the furs up here we will talk about later. Every soldier in the expedition would receive beaded work. Most of the bead work, this is a real wampum. This, of course, is a Ojibwa, and there are no Ojibwas where we're going, but every tribe would recognize this as peace. Now, later on, not only did this help us from being massacred by you have to remember we were outnumbered. The most we ever had would be 40, but 9 of those would not be military, and we would go into a village of maybe 5,000. So the odds were against us. This helped us, and do you know what else helped us? A female. And what was her name? Sacagawea. And Sacagawea just had what? A baby. No military expedition the Indians would fear that would have a female and a baby and wampum. And that probably, I could say, saved our lives. Because like I said, everybody wanted this. And if a tribe could get 40 of these, do you realize the advantage they would have of other tribes? Big advantage. So we'll talk about Sacagawea later on. Her name in Shoshone means bird woman. Bird woman. And she played a very important role. It's very interesting on the expedition. We had an African American, a slave, by the name of York. And we had a female, Sacagawea, and both of them, York and Sacagawea, had the same vote as all the white men on the trip. It was all equal. There were no blacks, whites, Indians. We were all together, realizing our survival depended on one another. And so we dropped all that craziness when we left the Mississippi River, and we all became equal. Everybody understand how important that is, coming together. All right, the weapons are gathered. Meriwether Lewis, he was in charge of the food. How do you take preserved food? Unfortunately, we used a lot of lead. And we had these lead containers. And we filled the lead containers with soup. Pea soup, vegetable soup, okay, meat soup, you name it, in lead containers. Now, we had to do that for a reason. After 2 years or 3 years, you run out of lead bullets. Do you understand? There's no trading post where we're going. There's no grocery store where you can obtain lead for your gun. We had to carry all that with us. But lead is heavy. So once we used a can of lead, of vegetable soup, we melted the can down. And we had bullet molds, and we made our own lead balls as we traveled across the plain into the mountains. So I don't know whether lead's good for you or bad for you. It was good for us because it saved our life. Remember, gunpowder and lead. Otherwise, this is worthless. You have to have both. I don't think the various tribes realized that. Even if they would have captured our guns, they would probably have not had the supply of gunpowder to use this, or the lead balls to fire from this. It's very interesting. These are very accurate weapons, but it takes a while to load them. Do you understand how to load these? Okay. Your powder horn. We had to have 45 powder horns. We had extra just in case, filled to capacity with gunpowder. You pour the gunpowder down in here, but you first of all have to do what? You have to blow into it. Why would you blow into this, especially if you just shot it?
To make sure there's no extra gunpowder?
Well, that or
So there's oxygen in there.
oxygen or sparks. What would happen if you had oxygen in there and sparks? Gun would blow up. It's a bomb. So you blow, then you pour your powder, and you ram the powder in, okay? Now remember, you got two buffaloes coming right at you, okay? And you just fired. Now you have to reload real quick. Or you have a grizzly bear coming at you, okay? So you ram it down, you get a patch, put the patch on, get your lead ball, put the lead ball, they carried 4 in their mouth, 2 in each cheek. Spit it out, bring it up, you bring up the rifle. Now you have to put gunpowder in the firing pan. You just take a little dab in there, close it, cock it back, bring it up, bring it down, and fire. I got on safety, but the spark, if you saw that, ignited the powder, ignited the ball, out it goes. 300, 400 yards, it's a rifle barrel. That means it comes out like this. Dead on accuracy. I tell you, we could never have had the expedition without these right here. All right. Clothes. Everything you see on Clark right now is exactly what I made. It's elk. We preferred elk above deer. Now, deer was good for moccasins because of rattlesnakes and copperheads. But we had to have something warm. Now, when the temperature would get close to 90, 95, or 100 degrees like it does in the plains, the guys would just strip down to their pants. But when we were in North Dakota at the Mandan settlement, 35 degrees below zero. And those Mandans ran around with just a little clothing as they could. We never really fully understood how they survived. They had moccasins, and they had some type of pant wear, and maybe a blanket, and that was it. And it would be 35 below zero. Your spit would freeze almost immediately. We'll talk about Fort Mandan later on. So we were in all different types of weather. Cold, heat, snow, rain. It was constant. Plus, going up the Missouri River. Are you going upstream or downstream when you go up the Missouri River from St. Louis? You're going upstream. If anybody's ever canoed upstream, you realize how difficult it is. We had a large, we called it a prog, a boat, and then we had 3 others filled with all supplies, but the men had to paddle. Now, the Missouri River was very low at times. You have to remember there were no dams, okay? So even the Ohio River was very, very low. When I sailed from Fort Pitt with my weapons and went down the Ohio River, there were many times everybody had to get out of the boat. We had ropes, we got on shore, and we pulled the canoes, the progs, across the sandbars in the Ohio River. That's how low it was. Same way with the Missouri. But we had to deal with that on a daily basis. Now that's when some of the men were bitten by copperhead snakes. There was one place we called Rattlesnake Hill, and I wrote this in my diary. There must have been literally thousands of rattlesnakes. You could hear the rattle from a distance when you got close, and you knew right away what you were coming in on. And most of the men who were bitten by rattlesnakes or water moccasins or copperheads, it's when we had to get out of the canoes and the prog, the boat, and go on shore to pull it across the sandbars. You can imagine how hard and difficult. Some days we would make 5 miles a day. Some days we would make 20 miles a day. If the wind was in our favor, we would have a little sail that we would shoot up, and we would make a little more depending on the direction of the wind. Now, we had 2 responsibilities on the Lewis and Clark expedition. Number 1, President Jefferson wanted us to map out every river, every creek, every stream. I have detailed maps of every one of those. Measurements, depth, quality of the water. Some areas we got into what we call the black area, and there would be large areas of coal. And the water would taste like sulfur. And we had to go to a spring to get our water because we could not drink out of the Missouri River or even some of the tributaries going into the Missouri River because it would be it would smell. You could smell it. Natural gas everywhere coming up out of the ground. Some of the men thought it was funny, and they would take their flint and steel and they'd go up to a hole where you had this gas and they would strike it. And you would have a flame coming up out of the ground. And some of the men used that for lights, and we would camp around that all night because it would just go on and on and on because of the gas. So you had coal, natural gas. We had to deal with all of that, and the drinking water was a big thing. You cannot drink out of the Missouri all the time because the Missouri is also called, like the Muskingum River in the Ohio lands, the Muddy River. Nobody wants to dip their tin cup in a muddy river and drink it. You had all sorts of bacteria. Of course, we knew nothing of bacteria, so we had no idea sometimes of what we're getting into. Now, furs. President Jefferson wanted to know every creature, every reptile, every bird, every mammal that we came across. We had to draw pictures of them, detail them, which we're going to show you here in a second, and we're going to have to send examples back to Jefferson. When we made Fort Mandan, okay, Fort Mandan is in upper North Dakota. You understand the winters. We decided to stay there the first winter. So we built a fort, calling it Fort Mandan. And at this fort, we would clean most of the animals that we had found going up the Missouri. Then we would stuff them. And in the spring, we sent 4 men back with the stuffed animals, pictures, maps, everything that we had back to Jefferson. Now, I was told that Jefferson and Monticello placed a lot of those in his house. In fact, I bet you if you'd go to Monticello even today, you might see some of the artifacts from the Lewis and Clark expedition. We had arrowheads, bows, spears, wampum belts of different colors and different sizes, furs, moccasins, various clothes of the Mandan was all sent back to Thomas Jefferson. Now, I heard in my old age, some of that ended up in a circus. Some of that ended up in a museum in New York City, and it caught on fire and was destroyed. So a lot of the collections that we collected during that time has been destroyed. Fortunately, Thomas Jefferson had some of them in his home at Monticello. So what type of animals? I'm going to pass this around. I drew pictures of this, okay? These are some of the critters that we saw. We'll start over here and just kind of pass it around to everybody. But this is my favorite. I love otters. And this is a western otter. And on the Lewis and Clark expedition, we knew what an otter was, but we never saw a western otter. The jag. Ooh, yes, jags. They were numerous everywhere, especially on the plains. Of course, their number one food would be the bison, and they would hunt like wolves. We'll send that around. Falcon. We had no idea about the prairie falcon. I painted these pictures myself. My wife and I were very fortunate to come across a lot of these animals and birds that they had on the trip. A prairie falcon. Oh my goodness, amazing. This is my buddy, Western Black Bear. I love that guy. He loved me, and he's sending me greetings. And fortunately, I was in a safe position when this was filmed. But we came across a lot of these early on. Then when we got close to Fort Mandan, it changed to, and I don't know whether I have that picture up right away, it changed to this buddy. This, of course, is the northwestern grizzly. 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds. So you can compare my buddy here, black bear, to the grizzly. A black bear might reach maybe 300, maybe 400 pounds, mature. This baby, over 1,000 pounds, coming at you full speed. Now you realize they can go up to maybe 20 miles an hour. And they climb trees. And they swim. And you can't get away from them. We'll pass these around. The white wolf, very rare in Appalachian area. We came across the white wolf, especially up in North Dakota, coming down through Montana around Yellowstone. A lot of the white wolf. Don't you just love badgers? Lots of badgers. Of course, they would feed on the snakes, and we never really killed a badger unless it was necessary because they would take care of insects and snakes. Did everybody see those in the back? Okay. Badger. Okay. Western hog. We knew what hogs were. We knew what wild hogs were, but we never saw anything like this. And they were very predominant just as we entered the Rocky Mountains. This was the number one source of food for the Teton Shoshone. Another western otter. We would see on the expedition otters play. Now, do you know when an otter, a female otter, has babies, how does she carry those babies? She flips over on her back, and her babies are on her tummy. And that's how she protects the babies. Very interesting. Red fox. We saw a lot of red fox. We have some red fox right here. And we knew about red fox, but out west they were smaller. We don't know why, but they were smaller than the fox here in the States. Oh, do you know the difference between a bobcat and a lynx? We were very familiar with lynx in Ohio and bobcats. Okay, this right here is a bobcat. You could tell the western bobcat because of the ears. And right away when you see those beautiful ears coming up, you knew exactly that was a bobcat. Can they kill you? Absolutely yes. Especially if they hunt with 2 or 3 at a time. Mountain sheep. We got into the Rockies, mountain sheep everywhere. I didn't like mountain sheep for food, but we used their skin, and when we got hungry up in the mountains, the Bitterroot Mountains, we would eat whatever we could, including horse and dog. We have 2 mountain goats. Predominant in the Rocky Mountains. Here again, I do not like goat meat or goat milk. A lot of the men love the goat milk. I never cared for any of that. Some of the men made soap out of lye, and they called it goat soap. We already smelled bad, and that probably just added to how we smelled. You can imagine, we would take a bath when we got to some of the rivers, but here's a picture of a grizzly bear. You did not want to see this coming at you. They have a keen sense of smell, and a grizzly bear, once they smell, especially if you have a cut, they're like sharks. They smell blood. and they'll come right at you. And of course, we have the brown bison. When we were on the expedition, we literally saw 3 major herds in the plains. Each herd contained, I let Meriwether Lewis do the counting. We were looking at least 3 to 4 million of these on the plain. Now, what is sad is this: the bison were gone by 1870. They were gone. And I think we are responsible for some of that because we opened up the West with maps, and it was very easy to cross the Mississippi River and hunt bison. Here's a picture of some of the areas, and you can see that William Clark has a red hat on. I think it's a Trump hat, but I'm not sure. But he had his picture painted when we were out in some of those areas of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Here's another of the Missouri River, what it looked like as we were canoeing. The hills would be unbelievable high and steep. Here's another picture of William Clark, and you can see some of the structures behind him, and the river, the Missouri River, is down here. Okay. Black-tailed jackrabbit. Jackrabbits are, this rabbit was huge. Okay, this was painted from a distance. When we got close to it, it's probably the size of a raccoon. Okay, only in the West. They call it the Western black-tailed jackrabbit. And my favorite, prickly pear. I love prickly pears. And when we were at the Great Falls of Missouri, we had to portage around the Great Falls for 5 miles. Now, one tree in sight, all open prairie, going around the Great Falls of the Missouri, and prickly pear everywhere. It was so bad because they lay flat on the ground or they come up just a little bit. They have beautiful flowers on them, but the needles are so strong, it goes right through your moccasins. So the first thing we did is we took our moccasins, and now we have double layer because of rattlesnakes, which were everywhere, and copperheads. Now we double layered the sole. 2 layers to keep the prickly pear from going up into our feet, just like having needles. Beautiful, but don't step on them. And it's hard not to step on them when they're so far everywhere. And that should be it, and we'll get into the tribes. Okay. There were major tribes that we came across. The first tribe would be the Utes on the Missouri River. The second one would be the Omahas. And then you had the Nebraskas. And then you had the Mandans. And then you had the Hadistis. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the girl on our trip, which is very interesting as I'm thinking about the Hadistis and the Mandans. Who was Sacagawea? Sacagawea, we know because of her husband, and we'll talk about how she got married. Sacagawea was 12 years old. Okay? When she was 12 years old, outside the Rocky Mountains, she was captured. Now you remember that they would capture females more than males. They killed the males. They wanted to keep the females for obvious reasons. She was taken to the Hadista, or the Mandan villages. The French had already started coming down into North Dakota, South Dakota, by the time we reached Fort Mandan. And a Frenchman by the name of Charbonneau, terrible man, treated women terrible. He gambled for Sacagawea. They would gamble for women. He won, and he won her as a wife. He already had a wife, but now he wanted 2 wives. So Sacagawea was the second of his wives. When we reached Fort Mandan, she was pregnant. And we had no thoughts about taking her on the expedition in the spring. But come spring, we wanted Charbonneau to go with us because he's French, he speaks Shoshone, he also speaks English. And we would need an interpreter when we got into the Rocky Mountains. He would not go unless his wives go. We said, no way we're taking 2 women and a baby on the trip. So we narrowed it down that Charbonnet would go as the French interpreter, and he would take his second wife, Sacagawea, and the baby. Now, I think I told you how important this was because it saved our lives. I'm just certain, because of these rifles and the weapons, that we would have been massacred if it had not been for Pompey in the Shoshone. That's the name she gave her son, Pompey, and Sacagawea, and of course this right here. This kept us alive. Everybody, all the tribes, even though they could not speak the same languages, knew exactly what this was. And they knew that we would not be a war party. What war party has a teenage girl? She was probably maybe 13, 14 years old. Probably the age of some of the girls in the room here. Very young. They had their children very, very young. Now, they didn't live too long. So the average age of Shoshone probably would be 25 to 28 to 30. If you were a Shoshone and you were a female and you lived to be 25, you were blessed. The mortality rate really went down for females. Males lived a little longer if they weren't killed in battle. But she kept us alive, as well as this, of course, and her baby. So we left in the spring of 1804, and we headed down to the Rocky Mountains. We could only go so far. We no longer could use our canoes because the river, we were reaching the course of the Missouri, and it got smaller and more shallow until finally we realized we had to have horses. Well, we don't have horses. So what were we going to do? We started trading. We did trade for these. We took quite a few of these on the trip. We knew this would be a big trade piece. The girls like beaded work. The beads that I have on here, every woman of every tribe would love this. So we traded with beads, we traded with hawks, we traded with knives. That's something that we knew would not give them an advantage over another tribe in the area. And we traded for pelts. Now there's one pelt that everybody wanted in Europe. All the women clamored for this. Beaver. This is prime beaver. You can see how we skinned it, dried it. It's not going to rot, not going to smell. These pelts are very old, probably 25, 30 years old. Perfect pelt. One of these would be worth $5. Sometimes $6. Now a buck is what? One deer hide. A buck skin. We would take these down, or they would take these down to trading posts. They would end up at Fort Pitt. They would end up on New York City, on the trade routes, and then, of course, they would end up in Europe. And women would make hats, and above all, they loved their, I think they call them, where they put their hands in the winter. Muffs. Muffs. This would go for muffs, and your Canadian rabbit would go for muffs. So we would trade this, lots of pelts, because the streams were filled with beaver to the various tribes, and they loved us. And we got along, except coming back with the Blackfeet. Now, other pelts, not quite as expensive. I'll pass these around, but don't handle them too much because of the oils on your skin. But you have a variety of pelts. You have really nice red fox. I love red fox. Not quite as expensive as beaver. Brown fox. Where's the wolf? Here it is right here. Okay, you got wolf. So I'm going to pass these around because I'm telling you, a lot of people never have a chance to. Ooh, I dropped it. You ready? Don't worry about the hairs. Most of you have cats and stuff, so. So that was money. We had no money on the Lewis and Clark expedition. There was no money beyond the Mississippi. You're not in America. You're in a foreign land. And we had to be able to trade with the various tribes. We had to be able to use sign language, speak French, which we had an interpreter, and eventually we learned some of the languages of the various tribes. I'm going to pass this around because very few people ever have an opportunity to pet a beaver. And they are really beautiful beaver. I'll start one there and we'll start a beaver over here.
Did you make pelts out of this rabbit?
No. My wife was with Clark and she would shot me. If I would harm a rabbit, my wife would have me out in the garage.
I was just wondering because you said you also like to tame them from a distance and stuff. Why are they like hostile?
We wanted to get a good picture of it. If we got close, it would move.
Just was wondering because you said it was so big. Some bigger rabbits
Huge.
are hostile.
Well, we did get somewhat close, but it was about the size of a raccoon.
That's a pretty big rabbit.
Very big rabbit. All right, the various tribes as we're passing those around. Okay? Remember, this is how we slept. At night, we would have furs. We would sleep on beaver. Wouldn't that be beautiful? To wake up in the morning and be wrapped around with beaver and fox. Okay? The beaver was really something. But now we're going to get into the tribes. There were so many tribes that we came across. As we started going up the Missouri River from, let's say, St. Louis, we came across the Otts. We're going to pass pictures around. Come on in if you want to. Okay, the Otts. The Iowa warriors. Osage, the Osage tribes. That's Osage. The Snake tribes, the Snake. Mandan, of course, we lived with the Mandans. Mandans. We have the Fox. Lakota, Teton Lakota. Those were some of the major tribes that we came in, and each tribe had a different language. And so sometimes even Charbonnet, Sacagawea, who could speak Shoshone, could not speak Ott or Teton or Iowa. So we would have to do with our sign language. Okay, we're going to open this up for Q&A. Did you want to film for Q&A? Let's have some questions for William Clark. Yes?
Were either of them married at the time, like when they went on the expedition?
No. Meriwether Lewis, my buddy, he was a confirmed bachelor. Clark had a fiancée, and he wrote her some letters that he sent back from Fort Mandan. One of the main requirements would be you cannot be married and you cannot have any children. They expected people to die. And they did have one death on the trip, but he had a burst, his appendix had a burst of his appendix, and they had no idea what to do. Doctors now, they look back and analyze it. It was his appendix, and that's probably what killed him. But that was the only thing. Otherwise, everybody came back in one piece. They were shot at a couple times, and they came close. But yeah, they could not be married. That was if you were married and you had children, they found out you were not going on the expedition. That's one reason why they would not allow Daniel Boone to go on the expedition. Daniel Boone was married and had 10 kids. So, and Daniel Boone lived outside of St. Louis. Remember that. And so Daniel Boone wanted to meet them and said, I want to go. He was like my age. And they said, you got all these children, you're married? No. So they would not even allow Daniel Boone on the expedition.
Okay, so you said you made your own clothes, right?
If everything was made by hand.
Okay, so how long would it like take to make like a piece of clothing?
This right here, I made this myself. I make all what I can. This took me about 2 months. And everything had to be, as you can see, we had to lace it. I had help on the inside. Okay, and then all this has to be cut. Okay, and then you have sections on this. It's tapered. And this would probably last on the expedition, I would say, for most of the trip. Wear and tear. You're not going to scratch it. You're not going to rip it. You don't want to wear this in the summer. Most of them would wear just a loincloth. Now remember, they were all men, well, Sacagawea, but the men just wore, you know what a loincloth is. Just a cloth. That's it. Okay? Sacagawea probably would have just had a loincloth also, and that was it. She was also nursing. So the various Indian females would nurse their babies by having the baby on them like a papoose carriage all the time. They would hunt, they would fish, the baby would always be right there. And they would breastfeed the baby. Whenever the baby wanted to eat, right there, you know. Very, very smart. Yes?
How flexible were the clothes? Like, were they able to like run in them and stuff?
Do what with them?
How flexible were the clothes? Like, could they like run? And...
Oh, I can run in this. Yeah, not anymore, but one time I could run. Okay, yeah, very flexible. Yeah, a lot of movement and so forth, which they would have, to have. Moccasins were made. I did not make these. I got these at the log cabin shop up in Lodi, but I love these. In fact, I did a speaking engagement up at Kent State, and some of the women wanted one of these. I could have sold them. There were still hippies up there. But, this is what we wore at Kent State. Anyways, yeah, but all handmade. I didn't make these, but they would make everything. Okay, they did not wear any underwear, although I have a shirt that they probably would have used for the first month or so, but by then that would rot off your back. Other questions anybody would have this morning? Yes?
Did Lewis and Clark like name the animals that they discovered?
Some they had to come up with new names, yes. They did not know what a prairie dog was. And they did not realize that whenever you have a prairie dog city, there would be thousands of rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes fed off the prairie dogs. So whenever they would reach a prairie dog mound where there would be hundreds or thousands of prairie dogs, they would bark. They call them the barking dogs. And they knew right away to watch the grass because there would be rattlesnakes everywhere. Rattlesnakes was a big thing out west. It still is today, but they had to really beware of rattlesnakes. The thing about it is they were so brave, at night they slept on the ground. I would have a hammock. Yes, you had a question?
Exactly how long was the expedition?
It started in 1803 with the letter that we have here. It ended in 1806. So from 1803 to 1806 would be considered the age of discovery. It took them almost over a year to leave the Pacific Ocean and retrace their route all the way back. When they got to the Yellowstone, what we know of as Yellowstone National Park, they split. I don't know why they did that. It was dangerous. But then they came across the Sulphur Springs, where the guys would take hot baths and so forth. Old Faithful, all these sites that we know of today were still in place. Any other questions anybody would have? Yes?
I thought the hot springs were so hot that they'd like melt your flesh off or whatever.
Probably some were, but they were different people. They were definitely different people. I hate to say this, Jeremiah, but you and I could not have gone on the trip. We would never have lasted. We think we're tough, don't we? No,
No.
not what they had to put up with. No, they were just different people. Probably not an ounce of fat on their body. Superb, their cardiac resistance and so forth. Walking, they walked everywhere, or horseback. Riding a horse takes a lot of energy too. They were just different people. We're not those people. Other questions anybody would have?
Were there any major illnesses that anyone experienced?
Yes, oh yeah. Fortunately, they had Sacagawea. And because she grew up as a Teton Shoshone, she knew all of the herbs. She knew all what she would say Manito, which is our god, Manito Manito would give. Cherry bark for a whooping cough. Yellow dye, they called it like a yellow dye or a yellow flower for stomach ailments. She became very sick at the falls, and she was about ready to die. And she told Clark, basically Clark really liked her and adopted her. After the expedition, he took her baby, educated the baby, and the baby became a missionary. So she told Clark exactly what he needed to go out and pick. And he did, and he mixed it with water. They used a lot of rattlesnake rattles. There was something, I don't know, the protein, or I'm not that familiar. So they would get rattlesnakes, cut off the tail, crush it up in water with something else. That was her ingredients, and she became well. But yeah, she had some really female problems that she would have died if it had not been for her instruction. And everybody got sick. You can't eat soup out of a lead container without getting sick. I'm surprised they lived as long as they did after the expedition.
I heard that she died a few years after the trip.
She did. She died, we're thinking she died in around 1815. We don't know exactly. She died on a reservation, but she didn't have her son because Clark took the son, adopted the son, and she wanted that. She realized how much Clark loved Pompey.
I was gonna ask, how did you not get lead poisoning after eating out of a lead container?
They probably did, but also they put lead balls in their mouth. You had to. You couldn't reach into a pouch. You got a bear coming at you. You got to be able to spit it out, put it in, fire. Load, spit it out, put it in, fire. It had to be fast. Yeah, they all carried at least 4. Some probably carried more than, I would probably carry 4 or 5 in my mouth. I'm not going to take time to go down here and pull out a ball, bring it up, put it on the gun. Because you realize, I mean, this was the only thing you had between you and death. And you had to be able to put that ball in there quick. Sometimes they used a patch, a grease patch. Sometimes they didn't have time. So you spit it out, ram it down with your ramrod, bring it up and fire. Anybody want to hold this to let you know how heavy? Who wants to come up? Come on up. I know. I knew she would because she beat me in arm wrestling. This is going to give you an idea, okay? Have you shot guns before? Mm-hmm. Okay. You can bring it up to point it if you're going to shoot it. You put it in your armpit. Okay. Hey, she's doing good.
What is this little part for?
That's where your patches are, your grease patches. They would use a grease patch, Arlie, if they wanted really good, precise shooting. But when you have a grizzly coming at you, they would not go down. They would not use the grease patch. Just powder in the ball. That's all we want to see. Anybody else want to hold this? Anybody? Any of the girls? Come on up. It's a lot heavier than it looks.
Oh, wow.
Then again, if you did run out of ammo and a grizzly bear was still coming at you, you could just use the butt of the gun.
I think you'd be the, you wouldn't have a
Too
chance.
much, but it'd give you a chance to run away for a second.
Yeah.
No, it wouldn't.
No, grizzly would tear you apart.
If anything, I just make it more angry.
Have you ever seen their claws?
No, I've never seen a grizzly bear in person.
What do you think? Has anybody ever shot a flintlock? No one? Man. Now, when I was at Mansfield Christian back when, I would take this into class and we'd go out behind Mansfield Christian in a wooded area and we would shoot. And all the kids in the class could shoot it. If I did that today, who would be coming my way real quick? I'd be arrested pretty quick. Yes,
Did they attach like bayonets to them at all?
you cannot attach a bayonet on this. They didn't need a bayonet for their accuracy. Now the smoothbore, yes. Yes. George Washington had snipers. Every sniper had this. You could shoot a British soldier at 400 yards and kill him. That's 4 football fields with this. Smoothbore, no. Maybe 60, 70 yards. And the bullet goes down. That's why they wanted these on the expedition. Anybody else? Any girls want to hold this? Evelyn, you want to hold it? Gift? No? You want to hold it? Okay. You can make sure that this butt is in your armpit. Firmly in your armpit. And it does have a kick, by the way, but you won't feel the kick. You have to keep it steady when it's up. It can't be doing this. What do you think?
It's heavy.
But guess what, Evelyn? If you were living back then, you would be very proficient on this. Your dad would see to it. Oh, yeah. Gift? Okay. Noah?
I have a question.
Yes,
Do you have any of the actual balls or powder to shoot at?
I do, but I don't bring it to school. I hunted deer with that until my wife told me I couldn't hunt deer anymore.
Well, I got an idea for a new field trip. My sister's shooting range. Bring that.
Yeah, my wife laid the law down. No more killing God's creatures. Anybody have any final thoughts? Any final questions? Yes.
Did Lewis and Clark take place in the Revolutionary War?
Meriwether Lewis was too young. Clark was on the fringe of the American Revolution. Lewis, of course, committed suicide. Meriwether Lewis. He had mental issues. Okay, that's about all I want to say about it because I don't want to really, he committed suicide. Clark lived a long, long life and raised Sacagawea's son. He became a missionary on the various, out there, I think it was Montana in that area, on a reservation. Unfortunately, reservations. Reservations are sickening. My wife and I did a lot of missionary work on reservations, and you don't want to go on a reservation. You feel so bad for the Native American Indians, how we treated. Any final thoughts? Very good questions. You have that little test. It's nothing. You can take it in your sleep tonight. And then I guess Wednesday, we'll be back in the groove. Okay? All right.